Hi, this is David Kenney. This is Light from Above. Glad you could be with us today on the program. Today we're discussing our continuing series about a New Testament Christian, and today we're going to look at the idea of controlling the tongue, or guarding. A New Testament Christian guards their tongue. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. This is part of a lectureship that I attended at the Memphis School of Preaching, and this is one of the photographs that I took in the library. The library is named after the man who's on this horse. That's M.B. Hardeman. And this is his champion Tennessee walking horse named Made of Cotton. She won the Tennessee walking horse competition in 1942. She's a prized breed of horse, and he would compete with Made of Cotton and other horses that he had. He was definitely a horse enthusiast. I like this particular picture because it really goes well with the illustration that goes along with our lesson in a moment. But M.B. Hardeman was a great preacher in his day. He has several books of sermons and debates that he's done, and anything that M.B. Hardeman wrote is definitely worth your consideration. So it was good to be at the school preaching and to be able to see some of the memorabilia they have from the life of M.B. Hardeman that's on display at the library there. As I mentioned, today we're talking about the idea the New Testament Christian controls their tongue. And that's important to note. Words are powerful things. You had the expression, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, sometimes you start looking at what 1,000 words may be, and you may wonder about that at times. So for example, the Gettysburg Address, not even 1,000 words, yet we have our young people, at least we used to, hopefully we still do, have them memorize the Gettysburg Address. Or Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. Or even Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. So the idea that a picture is worth 1,000 words is definitely true, but sometimes we need to keep in mind and remember that words are powerful as well. But there's also, words can also be a problem. And this is one of the statements that Brother Sam Wilcutt made in his book. He did an excellent job in the lecture, and I really enjoyed being able to hear him and meet him. But this is a statement that he made in the book. On the other hand, for quite a while, society has been suffering from an excess of words. Such may be seen from the many talk shows on television and Twitter accounts and constant Facebook messages. The words of Solomon are so true, in the multitude of words there wanteth not transgression, but he that refraineth his lips doth wisely. As a matter of fact, far too many people want to speak and far too want to listen. James 1:19. One's words are important. Jesus plainly declared that he would judge mankind by its words. Matthew 12:36-37. Thus the Apostle Peter quoted David, Psalm 34:13, by proclaiming the following: He that would love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips that they speak no guile. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 10. So when we talk about, the New Testament Christian guards their tongue, it's very important. This is a very important lesson, and I'm sure you've heard lessons like this, and we realize how important words are and speeches are, and we talk about that quite a bit on news, talk radio, and things like that. But we're talking, focusing more on the New Testament Christian, and we're going to look at basically 4 points in our lesson today about guarding your tongue. One about inconsistency of the tongue, and then the nature of the tongue, and then some sins of the tongue, and then some words that we choose. Now, let's first take a look at the idea of being inconsistent. Sometimes people will, they'll be quick to judge Christians, and they'll say, well, that person's saying this, but they're actually doing that. And they look at that and they say, well, they're inconsistent, and therefore they're a hypocrite, and therefore everything they stand for they just sort of toss out. Never mind that some of these people wouldn't even think of trying to be a Christian themselves, but they have no problem looking at others and condemning them for if they have some kind of shortcoming. Now, sometimes their criticism is definitely founded. I mean, there are examples after examples of people that, you've heard the expression, they talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. There are some people that are very inconsistent, habitually so, and it becomes very much a problem to the point that you can't really, by the words that come out of their mouth, you'd have no idea they're a Christian. I mean, through the character, through the whole course of their life. Now, some people, they talk a pretty good game, but their life doesn't match it. And so that is definitely something that we need to be aware of and we need to be careful about. It's one of the things the Apostle Paul wrote to the church at Rome. This is what he said in Romans chapter 2, 1 through 3. Therefore, you are inexcusable, O man, whoever you are who judge, for whatever you judge another, you condemn yourself. For you who judge practice the same things. But we know that the judgment of God is according to truth against those who practice such things. And do not think this, O man, who judge those practicing such things, and do the same, that you will escape the judgment of God. Now, that's talking about consistency or inconsistency. People were saying you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that, but they were doing those very things themselves. Now, sometimes people, they want to sort of smear that up a little bit. They want to say, well, you've commit these things and you're not perfect and you may struggle with these things, so therefore I could just do whatever I want to do. And, God's not going to hold me accountable for the things. I mean, why would he hold me accountable for something and not hold you accountable for it? And so it's important that, we keep in mind that consistency is important. Consistency is very important. But we also need to be aware that, consistency is important when we're consistent with the Word of God. Some people, they don't have any interest in living a moral life at all. But they say, well, at least I'm consistent. Basically, I guess they mean by that is, I say inconsistent things, I say immoral things, and I perform immoral things. And so I'm consistent, therefore I'm okay. But that's not enough. That's just not enough. You have to be consistent, but you have to be consistent with God's standards, not your own standards. If we teach against drunkenness but drink, we'll be held accountable. If we teach against sexual immorality, but we commit such, we will be held accountable for that as well. Same thing about stealing the company's resources. We will be held accountable for that. Stealing is definitely a sin. People are watching us, and that's important to note. Sometimes we think that they're not, but they are. They are watching us. I'm not saying that they're spying on us, but they're observing us. Sometimes they're observing us at times that we're not even aware of. Or we're not, maybe we let our guard down, or maybe we slip up and make a mistake, and they see that. And maybe they only have a little bit of time to spend with us, and so they have, a limited amount to know the condition and how we really are. Every once in a while, I hear somebody say something like this, and it's a story that I read in a book. The person that says, they're talking to a preacher, and they say, I'm not going to go to that church because there's hypocrites in that church. I don't want to go. I don't want to be a part of any hypocrites, so I'm not going to go there. And the preacher sort of, had a little dry smile and sort of replied to the man and said, well, there's room for one more. You see, Christians are not perfect. We make mistakes. And when we make mistakes, we need to confess them and ask for forgiveness and do what's right. Christians are not sinless. We make mistakes. We make mistakes in the things that we say and the things that we do. But what we do about that makes a difference. And not just what we do about it, but especially what God has done for us for when we make mistakes. So you need to keep that in mind too. That's very important. So when we talk about consistency or inconsistency, there's a lot of things that we need to give thought to. If we're saying one thing and doing another, we may fool some people, but God knows. God knows. We need to be aware of that and make sure that the things that we say and the things that we do would be what God would have us to do. So it's important to recognize that the tongue can make us look very inconsistent and to make sure that we're aware of that. But let's take a look at some illustrations the book of James gives for the nature of the tongue. And here's 3 pictures that I put for you to look at. That first one, the top left there, that's made of cotton, the one I mentioned earlier. Incidentally, in case I leave the wrong impression with you, Brother Hardiman would use this horse in competition, but it wasn't competition in a sense of horse racing at the track and gambling and things like that. No, this wasn't that kind of a competition. This is more like similar to a dog show. Like we would display certain breeds and characteristics, and they would judge them on their appearance and their mannerisms and all that. So that's that kind of a contest. He was not racing at a track or anything like that. But I like this picture because you see that Brother Hardiman has a bit in that horse's mouth, and he's able to control the movement of that horse. And then below it is another illustration we'll take a look at in a second. That is the wheel of a ship, and it talks about a rudder, and the other one is a picture from a forest fire that I took when I was visiting the area of Yellowstone. Found several areas of Yellowstone that were damaged by fire. But the idea of the bit in the horse's mouth, the book of James says about this in James chapter 3, 2 through 3, "For we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, also to bridle the whole body. Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body." Now, the idea of, where it says we're perfect, it doesn't mean that we don't commit sin. We're mature. We're not just flying off the handle and using expletives and things like that. That's not the mark of maturity. We need to be able to control our tongue. We need to be able to be aware of the things that are coming out of our mouth. Unfortunately, some people, they get the right impression that we don't have restraint in our personal life if they hear things coming out that shouldn't be coming out. And so, the bit in the horse's mouth, we have to be able to control our tongue. And that tongue has a lot of power, and we need to be aware of it. I mean, it turns the horse's body whichever way, even though it's really small. Well, the tongue is really powerful, and it has a lot of influence. And it could be a lot of influence for good. It could be a lot of influence for bad. And so we need to be aware of that. So that's one of the illustrations that the writer of James uses to make sure that we understand that, don't underestimate this tongue that you have. It may be small, but it's really powerful. And that goes into the next picture, and that was the one of the captain's, the ship wheel that connects to the rudder. James writes about this in James chapter 3, verse 4 through the first part of verse 5. It says, "Look also at ships. Although they are so large and are driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things." Now, we recognize through movies and all kinds of things like that the rudder of a ship is vital. If the person's not at the wheel of the ship, then we recognize that ship's out of control. There's a real danger there. But you know what? If the man's at the wheel and the wheel's not connected to the rudder, and he could turn all he wants, it don't matter. You see, we have to have control. And the tongue is like that rudder. It may be really small, but it will determine the course of our lives, the directions that we go. And again, it's another illustration of its power. Even though it's small, it's able to do a lot. Now, it's able to do a lot for good in these illustrations, or the next one even, maybe it doesn't do a lot of good, depending on how we're using it. And that's the forest fire. This is how James writes about this in James chapter 3, the latter part of verse 5 and verse 6. It says, "See how great a forest a little fire kindles. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body. It sets on fire the course of nature, and is set on fire by hell." So, forest fires do a lot of damage. Now, sometimes they can do good, but we recognize that, a fire can spread very quickly, and it can create a lot of damage really fast. And even before we even realize it, a fire can get started. I don't know how many fires that I've read about that happened. I can remember as a child, Smokey the Bear, and it talks about the importance of make sure you put your campfire out, make sure you don't leave a lit match, or make sure you don't you don't throw your cigarette butts out, or things like that. And it would talk about how just a little flame could create a whole lot of devastation. Well, James here is using that picture, that metaphor, to help us understand that we can create a lot of damage. The tongue can be very deadly. It can be very disastrous. Matter of fact, when we talk about the sins of the tongue, our next one, let's look what James says about it in James chapter 3, 7 through 12. And this is what it reads: "For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind, but no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men, who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Can a fig, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring yields both salt water and fresh. It's interesting, the writer of Proverbs, the wise man, made this statement in Proverbs 18, verse 21, the first part, death and life are in the power of the tongue. The tongue has done a lot of damage. The tongue has damaged friendships, destroyed some. The tongue has destroyed relationships, marriages, congregations, nations. It's hard to calculate how much damage the tongue has done in history. It's really hard to even fathom. It's deadly. And it's something that we better not underestimate. You know, it's interesting to me when I was looking through the list of sins in the Bible in various places, in particular the lectureship book, just how many different ones relate to our speech, to the tongue. For example, lying. Well, that's a pretty easy one. Lying is a sin. We recognize that. Although, it would be helpful if we kept in mind that we may use the terms a white lie and a black lie, but the Bible doesn't use such of a term like that. It's lying. You want to keep that in mind. Lying is a sin. It's a sin that we commit with our tongue. Also, gossip. Gossip is a sin. A lot of people's lives have been ruined by gossip. We probably should ask ourselves before we repeat something, is it true? Is it helpful? If it's not, we probably shouldn't be repeating it. We should probably be going to the person and talking to them, making sure they understand what's being said about them and try to help them clear that up. Also, whispering behind people's backs and saying things. I mean, that's related to gossip in a way. And then the idea of, inventing stories. Some people, they just invent things. They just make it up. That's like lying. It's the same kind of thing. We got to be careful that we are handling the truth correctly and that we're being accurate. But even if we're handling the truth correctly, even if we're correct about what we're saying, doesn't necessarily mean we ought to be saying it. There is such a thing as tact and diplomacy and kindness and those types of things we'll look at. But there's others too, like murmuring, complaining. The Israelites did that in the wilderness, and it cost many of them the promised land. If you look in 1 Corinthians 10:10, they murmured, they complained. They talked under their breath. They talked out loud and contend with Moses and contend with God. Angry words. Just words spoken in anger. They may be true, but they're spoken in anger in such a way or at a certain area, they do a lot of damage. I can remember the illustration. You probably heard it too. The father who has his son, he tells his son, here's a bucket of nails. I want you to take these and I want you to drive them into this fence, this wall, wooden wall. And so the boy just goes and he's just putting them, he said, just put them wherever you want, however you want to do it. Just put them all in there. And the boy was done, and his father said, okay, now pull all those nails out. And so the son did that. And he's wondering, what's he doing? And the father pointed out, he said, those nails are like angry words. You drove them in, and the fence is still there. But when you try to pull them out, the fence is damaged. It may still be standing, but it's been significantly damaged. And that's like angry words. We've got to be very careful the way we talk to one another and how we treat one another. It's very important. Also, other things that, hopefully we readily recognize the sins of the tongue: cursing, swearing, vulgarity, profanity, those kinds of things. My high school freshman English teacher, Mrs. Littman, whenever one of our students would say something that they learned at home or wherever they picked it up from, she would point out, well, that's vulgar. You can't say that. You're not supposed to say those kinds of things. And people would snicker and all that, and she would hold her ground, and she would say something like this: the use of vulgarity only demonstrates a lack of vocabulary. And you think about that, and that's pretty pointed, but it's true. I mean, if we had to resort to half a dozen profane words all the time, and we use them as exclamation points all over the place, and that's all we ever say, what does that say about our vocabulary, our intelligence? So we need to be mindful of that. But it's wrong to use those kinds of words. Blasphemy, speaking evil against God, is wrong. We should not be doing that. Speaking evil against dignitaries and government officials is wrong. Now, there's a difference about criticizing justly something. Like, for example, I'm opposed to abortion. I think presidents and members of Congress and judges who approve abortion are wrong. They're wrong, and they're right to be criticized by it. And they're right to be criticized for it because they're inconsistent with God's standards. And so for a preacher to point that out is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to stand up for God's standards. But blasphemy is different. When we blaspheme, we're speaking evil of what is right, what is correct, what's in accordance with God's standards. When we talk about God, we better be very careful. Another one, using God's name in vain. I used to see these shows where, maybe the program would do something great for these people, and they would just, oh my, and they would just go on. How to finish the expression. And I'm like, who are they talking to? They use God's name, but they're not using it towards God. They're just using it accommodatively. They're just using it for, to complete their expression. That's using his name in vain. That would be a sin. Also, dirty jokes. Those would be wrong. Slander or libel. Slander is to say something that's wrong, and libel would be that which is written. Those are sins. We cannot be involved in that. And beware of euphemisms, too, and slang. There's certain words out there that are slang words we have to be careful about. They're just derivatives of profanity or vulgarity. And so we really ought to know what we're saying and be careful about it because, sometimes we don't know. Maybe we may pick up something and not realize it. For example, and I'm not going to use any of them, but there's some acronyms out there that's very popular, been around for a while, but they've become even more popular as text messages has come across. I see them on Facebook a lot. People will use little acronyms, and every once in a while I'll see one, I'm like, I don't know what that is. And I'll go and I'll put it in my Google search engine and I'll type it up, and some of them I'm like, I wonder if that person knows what that term means. And every once in a while I'll send it to them, say, do you know what this word means? And they'll thank me for telling them because they had no idea. And so we have to be careful about that kind of thing because other people know. And they look at the language we use, and that's a reflection of the kind of person that we are. Also, false teaching would be a sin, and there's others too. But when we choose our words, we need to choose them properly, and that relates to our next point here that we want to talk about, the words that we choose. A friend of mine told me that her mother would often tell her this expression, keep your words nice and sweet because you never know which ones you might have to eat. And that's good advice. The Apostle Paul put it this way in Colossians chapter 4, 5 through 6. Walk in wisdom towards those who are outside, redeeming the time. Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. So, we have to be careful. Salt is something, I really like salt. I like it too much. I love it. Well, that's where our speech needs to be. Our speech needs to be pleasant. And there's some things that we need to think about. How about some of these words? Please, thank you, you're welcome, no thank you. How about those instead of some of the other stuff that you hear at a restaurant that's being shoved around? How about being kind? How about speak words of kindness to people? When's the last time, we like to receive compliments? When's the last time we have actually given compliments? We talk about that movie sometimes, Pay It Forward, and things like that, and that's great. The same thing pertains to compliments. Why not compliment people? And also, words of salvation, the gospel. People need to hear that. We need to be speaking those kinds of words. Well, about out of time, so let's go and review some of the points that we made when we talk about the Christian must guard his tongue. One, inconsistency of the tongue. We must be very careful with the words we say, that we don't send an inconsistent message. Also, the nature of the tongue is very powerful. If we're not careful, we can commit a whole lot of sins with our tongues. And we must be careful about the words that we choose. That includes when you get behind the wheel of the car. Those words count. And for me, when I look under the hood of my car. Thanks for watching our program today. Before we close our program today, we'd like to take a moment and review this roadmap to heaven with you since the matter is so serious. There are many incorrect set of directions out there, and sadly, so many people are following them. For example, some people have been given wrong turns. They believe things such as faith only, works only, or grace only. Or some attempt to change the order of the turns, being baptized before they even believe. Some people fail to realize what point they are on the map. Don't even open their Bibles yet, and they think they're saved already. As a person travels in a car or takes a hike, it has to follow the proper directions, so we must follow the proper directions to heaven. Let's take a look at the directions on our roadmap to heaven here. You have to look at these passages in your Bible for yourself. We'll just list the steps, the turns on the way. First is to believe or to have faith. And then number 2, to repent, to turn away from sin. Number 3 is to confess that Jesus is the Son of God. Number 4 is immersion, or to be baptized, which is a burial in water to have your sins washed away. And then you're added to the church by the Lord, not by a group of people, or not by giving some kind of testimonial experience or things like that. And then once you're added, you need to serve and worship the Lord faithfully all the days of your life. And the key word's faithfully. You don't waver. And that's very important. We need to keep in mind, too, that in Noah's day there was a big flood, and only people in the ark were saved from the flood. The same is true today. There is no salvation outside the Lord's church. Where are you on the roadmap to heaven? Thanks for watching our program. Please let us know if we can assist you with further information for your journey.